Hi there, my name's Jo and I'm an independent Stampin' Up demonstrator based in the UK. Today I'm going to show you how I've made this cute little box with this new stamp set. This is called Have a Hoot and it's coming in the Autumn Winter catalogue, which release is on the 4th of August 2020. So it's a cute little set that's got all these little owl images on it for various occasions, but on this for this project I've used the Christmas set. So it's just a little box which I've tied together just using our braided linen trim, and you'll see it's got two little windows here. So these windows have been created using our window sheets, and I don't know if you can see slightly, but they've been embossed as well with one of our lovely embossing folders just to give it a little bit of texture. So if I open the box here, you can see it's a two-part box. And if I open it up, you'll see here are all my tags. So there's three designs I've got in here. There's this little cute little one with the four of them on the branches. There's this little one holding a parcel. And then I've also got the one that was on the front, this one with the two little owls. So this box is actually holding 12 tags, but as you can see, there is still quite a bit of space in here. So I think you could probably fit in the region sort of 16 to 18 tags in here. And then in the centre I've got a dolly peg where I have tied on the ribbon or twine that I want people to use for the tags. And if you can have a quick look, you can see that the whole of the box is actually lined. So it's lined in melon mambo, which is contrasting on the top and through the windows you can see there. So it's just a cute little set. I think it'd be good for to give as a gift to somebody or to sell at craft fairs, something like that. I'm always very late in making my Christmas tags. It's one of those jobs I always forget about. So I'm getting a little bit ahead. So these are actually for my gifts this year. And I've gone with a slightly different colour combo rather than our traditional Christmas, just for a change really. Okay, so we're going to start making the actual box itself, and then I will go on to show you how I did the tags, just a little bit of watercolouring that was done on them. So I'm going to put that to one side. So to make your box, the top and bottom are actually very similar, just very slightly different in size. So you'll see from the original one here, this one is slightly shallower, just so we've got this lip at the bottom, which makes it easy to remove the actual lid. So I will go through them, but we'll start with the base. So I'm using crumb cake, so you're going to need a piece of cardstock which measures 21 centimetres, which is actually the width of our A4 card, the European sizes. So this is 21 centimetres, and then I'm going to cut it at 18.5 centimetres. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to score on all four sides at 1 centimetre and 3.5 centimetres. So that's on all four sides. Okay, so that's, you can see now that's all been scored. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to cut our top and then we'll start popping them together. So you're going to need a second sheet of crumb cake, and this time it's going to measure 20.2, so it's just shorter by 8 millimeters on the width, by 17.7. I'm going to cut that 17.7 first, and then the 20.2. Okay, so this one we're going to score on all four sides again, but this time it's at 1 centimetre and 3 centimetres. Okay, so that's actually our top. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to our base piece, and I'm just going to burnish all these score lines so you can hopefully see exactly where they are. When you're burnishing, just try and get them as neat as you can. Try and really get a nice sharp burnish on them. It will just make a difference when the actual box is finished. Okay, so once that's done, we now need to cut to make our base. So you'll see in each of the corners we've got a big square, we've got 2 rectangles, and then we've got a little square here. So on both of these score lines, I want to cut up to that second score line there. So that's on both of them. Okay, so I'm then going to remove this rectangle here, and then I'm going to make this into a tab. So this is the part that's going to have the glue on it. Okay, and this edge I want to just take a tiny slither off, just so it's at a slight slant. And again on here, these pieces are going to go inside your box, so you want them to be just very slightly so that they all tuck inside. They are hidden because we're going to line it, but it just makes it neater. And the reason I do that, these 1 centimetre strips, is firstly because it makes it a little bit stronger, but also I don't like to see the raw edge of the cardstock. So by having the fold, that gives you a much nicer finish on your box. So I'm just going to repeat that for the other side. So both score lines again, I'm going up to that second score line, and again. I'm just going to cut that at a slight angle, remove that rectangle, slight angle again on that one, and then make this into a tab. Make a little bit more of that one, I think. Okay, so once that's done, it should look like that. So now I just need to repeat that for my other side. Okay, so once you're done, that's how it should look. So you've got these 4 little tabs here, and each of these edges are just slightly tapered, apart from, I can see I've missed one here, which is very easily done. So there we go. So that's how it will look. Now what we're going to do is just glue the box together. So I'm using multi-purpose glue. I prefer this for box making. I think it makes the boxes a lot stronger, and also you do get a little bit of wiggle room. So as you're making it, if it's not quite in the right place, you've still got a little chance to wiggle it around a little bit. So each of these tabs, just adding glue, just making sure that they're at a nice right angle, and just hold them for a few seconds just to take hold. The 4th one's always a slightly troublesome one because you can't get to it as well. So there we go. So that's actually the base. But now what we need to do is just to glue these to the inside of our box. Now sometimes if I'm making a box, I will make them the same depth for inside so that they actually are really hidden. But I've made this one a little bit shorter because we're actually lining it. So just take a few seconds just to make sure that they glue down nicely. They sometimes take a little bit of persuasion. Okay, so that is the base of our box. You will find at this stage these will bow a little bit. It's just where they've got wet glue on them, and also once we've got the insides and the lid on, obviously it will hold it firmer. So that's actually our base, so we can put that to one side. And then I'm going to do the lid, and then at the end I will show you how to create the inside for your box. So this is our lid, which we scored earlier. I'm just going to burnish all these score lines again so that you can see exactly where they are. Okay, so we're going to cut this one exactly the same as we did before. So we're going to cut up these two score lines here. Excuse if you can hear pitter patter, that's my little dog just walked in the room. So as I say, this is exactly as before, so we're creating that little tab, and then we're just going to trim off those little edges. I'm going to repeat that for the other side. Okay, and then finally I'm going to repeat it for these two here. Okay, so as I say, this is exactly the same as we did for the base, but now what we want to do is we need to measure and cut our windows out of this top section, and then we'll create the actual piece that goes inside to give you the windows. So I'm going to flip it over so that I'm working on the back, because I'm going to use a pencil and ruler just to mark out my lines. They will be covered, so you don't need to worry about actually rubbing them out or anything at this stage. So what I want to do is I want to create a border that's 1.5 centimeters around the whole of the edge, and then I'm going to have a centerpiece in the middle here. So the measurements for this, it's 14 centimeters across, so we're going to mark it at 1.5 centimeters. We're also going to mark it at 5.8, 8.2 and 12.5. I'm just going to do that again so I can draw my line. So I'm at 1.5, 5.8, 8.2 and 12.5. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly draw those lines in so that you can see them properly. Okay, so there are our vertical lines. Now what I want to do is mark our horizontal lines, and this is 11.5 across. So we're going to mark it at 1.5 and we're going to mark it at 10. So again, 1.5 and at 10. Okay, so these are our windows. So these are the pieces that we're going to remove. So you could remove them by, if you're confident, popping it on your trimmer and doing it that way, or if you're not so sure, you can use a knife or you can use scissors, whatever you're comfortable with. But what I want to do is to actually cut across the center first. So I'm just using a knife and a ruler, and I'm cutting across the diagonal. Okay, so I want to do that on both windows. I prefer to do this piece with a knife and ruler because I think you get a better cut on it. Okay, so once we've done that, what we're going to do now is to actually remove parts of these. As I say, you could do this on your trimmer if you wanted to, but I prefer just to take a pair of scissors and just trim them out. Now, can you see I'm leaving a little border here? That's because we're going to fold these pieces to give a nice clear edge on our window. I'll show you the original in a moment. Don't worry if they're not quite all the same width. It doesn't matter. It's going to be hidden, as I say. Okay, and then across here. Okay, so once all those pieces are done, what we need to do next is to score these pencil lines here. So again, I'm just taking my ruler, but this time a ball tool. You could do this on your trimmer again if you wanted to, if you're confident and happy to do so. I just find it easier just to do it with a ball tool in front of me. I can see exactly what I'm doing. Okay, so that's all of the edges that have been scored. So I'm just going to fold those back carefully. And again, just take a bone folder and just burnish them nicely so that they're all nice and neat. Sometimes you find if you haven't quite cut into the corner, it might just pull the card a little bit. So just be a little bit careful. If you can feel it's not quite caught it in the corner, just use a pair of scissors or a knife just to complete that process. Okay, so in a moment we're going to actually glue these flat, but what I want to do first is to cut out my centerpiece and mark my windows on my melon mambo piece. So as I said, this is 14 centimeters and this is 11.5. So we want to cut a piece of melon mambo that's just very slightly smaller so that it will go inside of the actual score lines themselves. So I'm going to cut this at 13.8 because that will give us a 1mm border around all four sides. And then we're going to cut it at 11.4. So if I turn that over here, if you can see, once I place it on here, inside it's slightly tighter, but it just gives us a nice border around the edge so that we're not actually affecting these lines actually folding properly. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to place this onto the top of my box, and I'm very, very carefully going to just flip it over, try not to move it. Okay, and then what I want to do is just to draw those windows inside onto my melon mambo piece. Now you could obviously measure this if you wanted to, you could actually measure it, but there's not really a need to, so if you can do it that way then you know where you are. So when this goes inside, this is actually going to stick like that on top because we've actually done the windows through that way. So what I want to do is just to mark this so that I know which side is the inside and which side is the side to be glued. So I'm just going to mark that with a T for top, and I'm just going to mark that with a T for top as well, so that I know that when I stick this in, it's going to stick in like that. Okay, so what we need to do is to cut these windows. Now I have done this by eye, but if you prefer, you can use a trimmer or you can measure it. And I would say that my border is about 3mm, something like that. So I'm just making sure that that goes through nicely through both windows. Try not to overcut, but if you do find it goes a bit further than you want to, it's not the end of the world. We can stick a piece of tape over it, or if it is really too far, then obviously you can always adjust it somehow. So I'm just, as I say, by eye, I would say it's about 3mm, something like that. Okay, so that's my windows cut. Now what I want to do is just to rub these pencil marks out. Don't remove this T mark, because remember that's our marker to tell us where we're actually going to stick that. Okay, so that is done and that is done. Now what we need to do is to take our piece of window sheet. So we want it to be slightly smaller than this. So if you recall, the measurements on this were 13.8 by 11.4. So I'm going to go at 11 by about 13, and that should be sufficient. So I've got a piece of window sheet here, so I'm going to cut this by 11 by 13. This is just going to be inside, so you're not going to actually sort of see the edges of this anyway. And what I need to do is now to emboss it. So I'm using this embossing folder here, which is called Dainty Diamonds. It's very subtle, and it's very delicate, so it works really well for this. So this is it here. I might use it the other side, so I have the deboss side on the next one, just for a change. So I'm going to take my piece of window sheet, and I'm just going to pop it inside and run it through my machine. So once that's embossed, you'll see this will happen. It will also automatically start bowing on you. That's fine. We're going to glue it down anyway. Depending on how detailed your embossing folder is, you'll get more curling depending, you know, on that. So don't worry about it. This is the deboss side. As I say, it's just a little bit different to the raised side, and I'm going to have the deboss side showing through this time. So I've got all my elements here. What I want to do now is just to glue these pieces down here. So I'm just going to run some glue underneath all of these pieces. Okay, so as I say, the reason we've done this is because this gives us this nice finished edge here rather than just a sort of cut edge. So it just makes it that a bit nicer really. So once that's done, I then want to stick inside my window sheet. So you can see it's just going to stick just across both layers there. So what I'm going to do is just put a bit of tape at top, bottom, and then one in the middle. So this is the embossed side, so I'm having this up because I want to see the debossed. And I'm just going to stick this inside here. Again, I'm just going to burnish it roughly just to make sure it sticks down nicely. So you can see it does lay flat quite well. Now what I want to do is just to be very careful and mark where my T-point is. And if you recall, that is going to go over the top like that. So what I'm going to do is use tape for this element. So this is the piece that's inside. I'm going to just add tape to the reverse. Just to hold that centerpiece down. So I'm going to remove this one entirely, but these ones I'm going to actually use an old card maker's trick of just pulling back about an inch or so of my sticky edge, which gives me an opportunity just to position it before I actually remove all of the backing. So I just bend it backwards. Okay, so I know that this is my T mark, this is my T mark here. So I'm just going to position this on top and just very lightly just push down in those corners where that tacky piece is. I'm going to turn it over and make sure that it's exactly where I want it to be, and I'm quite happy with that. That's in quite a good position. If you get a little edge corner like this, you can just use your ball tool just to push it, just to make it a squarer edge. Okay, so I'm happy that that's in the right position. So I'm going to turn it over now, and I'm just going to very carefully, one by one, pull these tabs out. So by doing that, I'm making sure that it's sticking in the right place and it's not going to move. Okay, so that's the inside and that's the outside of your box. So one final pencil mark just to remove is that T mark. And then I'm going to make my box up exactly as we did the base. So the 4 tabs glued in the corners, and then we'll glue the other pieces to the inside of our box. that's our lid. So now if we take our base, we should find that this fits perfectly on top. There we go. So that's our actual box complete. So now that that's done, what I'm going to do is to show you how to do the inside of the base so that you can see exactly how that's made. So that's our box. I'm going to pop that to one side as well. And now we need to take a piece of Melon Mambo cardstock again. So this time we need to measure a piece of A4 that's going to be 28.4 centimetres long by 16.2 wide. So I'm going to actually cut my 16.2 first. And then I'm going to cut this at 28.4. Okay, so now we need to do lots of score lines across here. So we're going to start at 2.4, so that's our first one. We then go to 8.4, 10.8, 13.2, 15.2, 17.6, 20, and then at 26. Okay, so once we've got all those score lines, we're then going to turn it round, and in portrait format, we need to score at 2.4 on both sides. Okay, so now that's done, I'm just going to burnish all those score lines just so you can see them properly. Okay, so hopefully you can see all those lines there. So this section in the middle is actually our middle channel, and this is where our little dolly peg's going to sit. And then these two are going to be folded in on themselves in a second, and these are the edges of our box. Okay, so first thing we need to do is we need to actually cut this so that it will go together. So starting from the right hand side, I want to cut up to that first score line, and then I'm going to create a tab like we did on the other boxes. Okay, so then I need to cut up the next score line along. I'm going to miss one, and then I want to score up the next one. Okay, so effectively I've got two pieces here that have got a score line in the center. Now I want to actually remove this completely, so I'm just folding everything else out the way, and I just want to cut across to remove that section completely. Okay, so it will look like that. I'm going to cut the next one. Again, I'm going to miss one and cut up the next. Now again, I want to remove that completely, so that's that two sections will be removed out. Okay, and then finally I'm going to cut up the next score line, and then I'm going to create a tab like we did before. Okay, so it will look like that. So now what we need to do is just repeat that on the other side. So once it's all cut, it will look like this. Okay, now as I say, this center panel is where your dolly peg is going to sit, and these two sections either side actually need to be stuck back to back so they are raised like that. So if we do that first, I'm going to turn it over. I've got my center panel and I'm going to add glue to this section here, and again this section on the other side of that center panel. So now I'm going to fold that over and I want to glue that in place. Again, just take a little bit of time just to make sure it sticks down properly. Obviously be careful of the glue the other side. Okay, so it will look like that when it's done. So that is going to be our bottom and that is going to be glued in, so don't worry about that excess glue there. So that is that part, and then these are going to be made like we made the base and the top of the box, but this time we want to stick our tabs on the outside, so they're actually going to sit on the what is the outside of potentially a box, but that's going to sit inside our base. So if you glue the tabs on the correct side and then just square them up to the outside edge. So again, just glue. This is where you have to train your brain to do it the other way. Again, just make sure that that's glued in place. Do make sure this is nice and tight at right angles, because it's a very tight fit inside your box, so you want it to be as tight as you can get it. Okay, so that is the inside of our actual box itself. So if I bring the box back, now this, as I say, is a very, very tight fit. So when you pop it in, you might find that when you push it down, you get a buckle in. Okay, don't worry, because once that's glued in, you're not going to see that. And these will be glued to the side and they're going to be all reinforced together. Now I'm quite happy that that's all sitting in there quite nicely. Depending on where you've scored and cut, sometimes you might get a little slight raise above your edge. If it's a lot, I would say remove it. If it's a tiny bit, like mine is there, it's only on one edge, I'm actually going to just manipulate it when I glue it, so hopefully it's not going to stick out too much. I think I'd make more problems if I tried to trim it at that stage. Okay, so that's all done. So I'm going to take that out, and I want to add some glue to the base of my box, and I also want to add some glue to the insides edges. The reason I glue the box as opposed to the insert is that when the insert is squeezed in, any excess glue will go inside the box, whereas if you did it the other way, any excess glue would sort of squeeze out, if that makes sense. So I'm going to pop this in, And then I'm just going to make sure it's all nice and neatly into all the corners, all the edges, and glue the side pieces. These two little flaps in the middle where your dolly peg is, I would try and just hold those out for a moment because we're going to glue these edges in. So just make sure it's all fitted really nicely. And you're happy that it's all glued nicely in place. Okay, so now that I've done that, I'm actually going to glue those edge pieces in. Now, what I recommend is that you use some kind of PVA as opposed to the multi-purpose glue for this part. The reason I say that is that multi-purpose remains tacky even when it's dry, whereas PVA doesn't. So PVA will dry clear and you'll have no tackiness. So that's why I just prefer to use that for just this little project. So I'm just going to push those out of the way. Now this centerpiece, I just want to position it 100% so it's flat in the middle. That's why I just held those pieces back just a little bit. So again, can you see that one's slightly out there? So I just want to make sure that it fits nicely. If you have a little gap, it doesn't matter because that's where we're going to be gluing our edges in a second. But just make sure that they're flat. Okay, so now that's done, I'm going to add some PVA, and if you've got a fine tip glue pen, then that's very good. If you haven't, I would recommend just putting some glue perhaps on the end of something like your ball tool and just putting a thin line up just to make sure that it sort of is not too much there. I say this dries clear, so I'm not too concerned if I've got a little bit more than I need because it will dry clear. But equally, if anything oozes, I will try and actually clear any away. So once that's done, I'm just going to move these up and I'm going to hold them in position. It is a little bit fiddly, but if you can hold them in position just for a few moments, they will actually go off. And then they will be quite secure. Okay, so that's nearly gone off now. It's not far off. It should finish off drying and it'll be good to go. So once that's done, you're ready to make your tags and pop those inside your box. Little dolly peg goes in the center, lid on top, and then we're going to tie it with a piece of linen thread, which I've forgotten to leave a tag out, so let's grab one of those quickly. And that's done. So I'm literally going to take my piece of linen thread, and I tend to tie it in a knot to start with, just here, and then going to pop my tag on top. And then I actually tie another knot on it, and it just holds it nice and securely there, and tie a bow, and that's it. That's your project complete. So hopefully that's explained how that box is made. It's a reasonably simple box. It's just making sure that you're quite precise with your measurements, just to so it fits nice and snugly. So what I'm going to do now is just very quickly show you how I made and painted the tags, or one of the tags. I'll start with this one here, and then obviously you can create your own tags to fit inside. Okay, so now that we've finished our box, I'm just going to show you very quickly how I made one of these tags. They're all made exactly the same way, but you can use them you know, how you want. Obviously different colorways and things like that, so it's your choice. I'm just going to briefly show you sort of how they're made. They're quite quick and easy, and if you do them all sort of together, They come together really, really quickly. So I'm putting that to one side. This is the stamp set we're using. This is new from the 4th of August 2020. This is a little owl image I'm going to use, the two little owls on the branch, and then the greeting up here is the one I'm going to use. Just for quickness, what I will do is I will just stamp this greeting onto the one I'm going to demonstrate. But what I did was I heat embossed that using white embossing powder on a piece of Melon Mambo cardstock. Just heat set it, and then that mat is mounted onto 3D foam. But for the quickness of this, I'm actually going to stamp it just in Melon Mambo ink. Okay, so you need 2 pieces of cardstock for each tag. You'll need a piece of Whisper White, which is 5 centimetres by 10 centimetres, and then a piece of Melon Mambo, which is 5.5 centimetres by 10.5 centimetres. So I'm going to pop this into my tag punch, just making sure it's nice and level. Okay, so that's my tag. And then once I've stamped, this is going to stick onto here, and we will just fussy cut that top. You could do, if you wanted to, cut it slightly smaller and leave a sort of square with just this fancy edge. It's entirely up to you. So, you know, that's your choice, but I just fussy cut those just to finish them off. So I've got my owl image, and what I'm going to do is I need to stamp it into a permanent ink because I'm going to be using water. So I'm using Stays On permanent ink, and I'm just going to ink my image, and then I'm going to stamp it towards the bottom of my tag. Okay, so that's now done. So I'm going to stamp my greeting last because I'm going to be using water around here. So I just want to make sure it's absolutely dry before I commit myself to stamping the greeting on it. So I used various colours to decorate them. I used Granny Apple Green and Shaded Spruce. So these are for the mistletoe leaves and also the little branch leaves here. I used Balmy Blue just to give me a very light wash in the background. So this is just these parts here. And then I'm going to use a marker, which is this Early Espresso. And that was just to do the beak and also the little feet. And then the rest of the colouring was done with soft suede. Okay, so I'm going to start off with the soft suede. Just put the others to one side for a moment. Now, if you can get some colour into the lid of your ink pad, that's a good way to use it. Or alternatively, what I quite often do if I'm using a lot is to actually use my blocks to pick up some ink, and I use these as sort of a palette really. So I will probably do that if I was doing lots of them, but just for this one I think we're quite good to go like this. So what I want to do, I want to make my ink in here reasonably wet. I don't want it to be too dry, but I don't want my brush to be too wet. So it's sort of finding that nice balance really. And what I do tend to do is just to take a piece of kitchen roll, some kind of tissue, that I can then just blot off any excess water just from my brush. So this is nice and wet, it's moving around nicely, but my brush won't be too wet. So I'm going to start off, and I'm just going to test a piece on here. Now I can see that's flowing quite nicely. I'm just going around the outside edges of that wing. I'm wiping excess off my brush, and then I'm just going to pull in some of that colour that I've just laid down just around those edges, and it just gives it an all over colour. So I'm going to do the same again, pick up some ink, just blot it slightly, start around the edges. Now can you see that is really faint? I'd rather that than it be too dark, because I can go in and pick up more colour and then I can add it on top. If it's the other way, it's very hard to remove, so don't worry if it's too light, too wishy-washy for what you're looking for. Just build up those layers, and if you take your time to build those layers, then it really does sort of add to it. So again, wiping off excess, just blending it in. I'm going to let that dry for a moment, and then I will come back and bring in some more colour. So I'm doing the same again, just blotting it off slightly. I'm just going to start on the other owl, just laying some light colour. Just always make sure that your brush isn't too wet. It is a fine line, and it's just trying to sort of get it to pull in really. Okay, so that's my first layer. Now what I'm going to start doing is just bringing in some highlights. So again, I'm just moving it around. Wherever you think there'd be a shadow. Now, Stampin' Up! Stamps are brilliant for letting us know where the shadows are, because we get little sort of dash marks. So use them as a rough guide, but also use your natural eye. So wherever you think a shadow might be created. So I know there would be under this wing. And sometimes what I do then is I literally just dab it under that wing, just to bring in that darkness. Again, just going to pull in some more colour up the top here. These are cute little images because they're quite small, so you can sort of play around with them a little bit. If you've got bigger areas to fill, it can be a bit overwhelming. And just see, I'm just keep wiping that brush just to remove that excess. Again, just add in some more colour. Yeah, I use that dabbing motion sometimes if I want a bit more depth. Okay, so I'm quite happy he's come together quite nicely. So you can see this one is a slightly different colour to this one at the moment. So when they dry, they do sort of change colour a little bit. I then want to pick in some more depth of colour for his eyelids, I guess. So I'm just going in a little bit darker this time. And then where I want the shadow to be, I will just go in darker still, again with that little dabbing motion, and then you get sort of a nice shadow going across. Now that is quite wet, that eye, so I'm just going to let that dry for a second. Then I can add some more in. Okay, and you can say you can just build up layers until you're happy exactly sort of where the colour is laid. I'm then going to use my pen, and I'm going to just colour his little claws in. I'm then using the same pen, so this is Early Espresso, just to colour his beak. And now I'm just going to do the branch along here. Now you can't really see the branch properly. It's kind of sort of hidden under his feet, so you have to kind of sort of create it yourself really. It's just a little bit of a shadow. So again, I've just created it, and I'm just going to make it a little bit darker on the top because that's where the shadow would be created. That's it. So that's now done. I'm quite happy with that. So that is all of my soft suede I'm going to be using. I'm just going to pull that down just slightly there. So that's all my soft suede, so I can put that to one side. So now what I want to do is to add the green. So I'm going to use shaded spruce for these fern type branches down the bottom. I've got enough in the top here. So that's quite quite pow. I'm not going to have a great deal there, I don't think. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put the edge of my block just onto my ink pad. Then I can shut that up and then I can pick my colour up from here. So by doing that, your ink pad is closed, so it's not open, so it won't be drying out or anything, although they take a long while to dry out. So I'm just using my fine tipped water painter for this. You could do this little part with a pen if you wanted to. Again, just blot it off if you think it's got too much water on it. Okay, so that one's done. Now what I want to do is I want to actually do my mistletoe, and what I did is I actually created this as a very slight sort of two-tone on it. So I'm going to just pick up some of that ink again, just onto the end of my block, and I started off putting a layer of granny apple green down. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is just to go back with a little bit of the shaded spruce, but not taking it all the way down. So I'm literally sort of doing the top part and blending them in together. Okay, so that's that part done. So if I put those out of the way as well. So I'm then going to go to my just slightly thicker water brush, because I want to get a more of a wash really with regards to the background in the blue. So again, I'm just going to take another block, any size will do. And I'm just going to pop a little bit of the balmy blue ink onto my block. So what I want to do is I want to actually make this more of a wash. So I'm going to squeeze my water painter just so it releases quite a lot of water. And then I can really mix this up to give me a nice effect. Now what I do sometimes do is just test it just on a scrap piece, just to make sure that I'm quite happy. Again, don't want it too wet, but you want this to flow, so just be careful you don't go over the colours that you've just laid down. So we're just going to do it roughly. You don't need to go right up to the edges. It's really as I say, a wash for the background, so don't worry too much. So just filling in all the little gaps here. And again, this is better to go in lighter, because if you go in too dark, it's hard to lift it. So if you go in nice and pow, then you can just go in and add a few more touches if you want to. Okay, so I'm quite happy that that is now done. So what I want to do is just to stamp my greeting. So as explained, I'm going to just stamp it this time. So I'm using Melon Mambo, and I'm using the All I Want for Christmas Is You stamp. So I'm just going to ink that up. And I want it to be at an angle, so takes the stress out of trying to line it up. So that's that part done. The other thing that I did do is I added some glitter to it. So this is just our Dazzling Diamonds glitter, which I keep in a little pot with a little spoon. So I'm just going to use my PVA glue, Now I added some little dots to the mistletoe berries. I also just added some glue wherever the little dots are or the little stars. You don't have to be precise because this is iridescent glue, iridescent glitter. It kind of doesn't matter if you kind of get it where you don't want it. It's Christmas after all. So once I've added that, I'm just going to carefully just lift it and add my glitter. Ordinarily I'd give that a few moments just to dry off, so obviously it was not handling it, but I'm going to go straight in and I'm going to glue my tag down onto my Melon Mambo piece. Okay, so then I'm just going to fussy cut just around that edge, as I say. And you're better off, the quicker you can do this, the better. It's when you hesitate, you get sort of uneven, very uneven edges. There we go, so that's fussy cut, and just one last thing that I need to do is just to punch that hole through again. I'm using one of our now retired hand punches, but you can use any kind of hole punch that you've got just to cut through. And there we go, so that's our little tag, and then that would go obviously in our box, and then once it's in our box we'd make them all and that would all complete the project. So there we go. So this is actually our new box here. So this has got the deboss side, and then this is the old box that I did originally, which has got the emboss side. So it's up to you which one you like. The deboss is definitely more delicate, but I actually quite like the embossed, I think, really. But there we go. So that's that project. So I hope you'll give it a go, and let me know how you get on. If you've got any questions, please contact me. If you'd like to see more of my videos, then don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thanks for joining me. Bye.